I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. It started with the little things, the ones you'd barely notice until they built up like a wall, hiding the truth in plain sight. At first, I told myself it was just life moving too fast, a product of being together so long. But looking back, I see the first signs were there, small cracks in our world that would eventually break it wide open. I was always proud of what my wife and I had built together. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a decent home, things we both worked for. We had this rhythm, this pattern that only 2 people who know each other deeply can maintain. If you had asked me last year, I would have said she was the love of my life, the one person I trusted above all else. But, well, things changed. The first crack was a strange one. We were on vacation, something we hadn't done in a long time. I thought it was going to be a time to reconnect, to remember who we were before life got so complicated. We were on the way to the mountains, laughing, planning hikes, talking about places to eat. Then she asked if we could stop at a gas station so she could grab something from inside. No big deal. I pulled over, and she left her phone on the seat while she dashed inside. I thought it was a rare oversight, she was glued to that thing. So, as I picked it up to hand it back to her, it lit up. I glanced down, instinctively, not thinking anything of it, until I saw the message. "Can't wait to see you again, beautiful." The words might as well have been a punch to my gut. I felt my mouth go dry, heart racing as if trying to make sense of it. By the time she came out, I'd already put the phone back, pretending nothing was wrong. She grabbed it and smiled at me, as if nothing was amiss. I wanted to believe her, tell myself it was a spam message, some joke. But I knew better. That smile, that overly casual move to stash her phone back in her bag, it was like she knew I'd seen it. And she didn't want me to know that she knew. I decided to play along, to act like nothing had happened. No point in ruining our vacation. But my mind wouldn't let it go. I wanted to confront her right then and there, demand an explanation, but instead, I filed it away, tucking the anger deep down where it couldn't show. It was the first time I'd ever had to hide something from her, and that feeling of mistrust started to spread like a poison. I tried to shake it, to let it pass. But little things like that kept happening. She'd be on her phone late at night, texting someone when she thought I wasn't looking. Or there were times she'd come home later than usual, excusing herself with vague mentions of work, though she'd never been one to put in long hours before. Then, there was the sudden obsession with her appearance. New clothes, constant trips to the gym, perfume I hadn't smelled on her in years. I wanted to be a good husband, to encourage her to take care of herself, to stay fit. But in the back of my mind, I knew she wasn't doing it for me. A few weeks after that vacation, the tension in me was unbearable. The house felt colder, emptier, as if it was just a set piece for the life we were pretending to have. So, one evening, I decided to look at her phone records, not even knowing what I was hoping to find. I remember sitting in the dim light of our bedroom, scrolling through numbers and times, my hands shaking. And there it was, a single Virginia-based number, appearing dozens of times. At every hour, day and night, stretching back months. A number she'd never mentioned, a number that wasn't mine. It was the proof I dreaded. I sat there in silence, staring at the screen, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like a stone. But I knew I couldn't confront her yet. I wanted more. I needed to know who this man was, how far this went, what had happened to the life I thought we had. The next few days were hell. Every time I looked at her, every kiss, every smile, every touch felt like a lie, a cover-up for something I couldn't yet prove. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home, watching her go about her day as if everything was normal. But inside, the anger was boiling over, each passing day building up my resolve. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see for myself, to find out what was really going on. So, I reached out to a friend who had experience in private investigations. It felt strange, underhanded, but he assured me it was the best way. He suggested tracking her phone, setting up a monitoring app that would let me know her every move, and even following her if need be. The idea felt ridiculous, something out of a movie, but I was desperate. I had to know the truth. That night, while she was asleep, I quietly installed the app on her phone, syncing it with mine. My hands trembled the whole time, but once it was done, I felt a twisted sense of relief, as if I'd finally taken the first step toward taking back control. I lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd find in the morning. The following days were a haze of watching and waiting. Every time she left the house, I'd check the app, following her digital footsteps. Sometimes she'd go straight to work, just as she'd said. But other times, she'd make a detour, stopping at places I knew weren't part of her usual routine. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was stacking up, piece by piece, like a puzzle I wished I'd never started. Then came the night I caught her red-handed. She told me she was meeting some friends for drinks, nothing unusual. But as I watched her location on the app, I saw her head to a hotel across town. I sat there, numb, staring at the screen as the little dot blinked, telling me she'd arrived. Minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't know what to do, whether to storm over there and confront her or stay home and gather myself. My whole body shook with the weight of what I'd seen. It was no longer a question of doubt. The truth was out, staring me in the face. And the worst part? I hadn't even confronted her yet. I knew she'd lie, twist it around, try to shift the blame somehow. But I was ready for that. That night, after watching her location flicker at the hotel for what felt like an eternity, I sat alone in the dark, grappling with a flood of emotions I hadn't felt since my teenage years. The anger had reached its boiling point, but there was a strange clarity within it. I had all the confirmation I needed. Now, it was just a matter of how to act on it. The days that followed felt surreal, as if I were living someone else's life. My wife continued her usual routine, smiling as she sipped her morning coffee, chatting with our neighbors, and texting someone, a man I knew was waiting for her at the end of the day. Each little laugh, every casual glance she threw my way, stoked the fire inside me. I wanted her to know I'd caught on, to see the shock and guilt on her face. But instead, I played along, biding my time and planning every detail of my next move. I took the opportunity to prepare while she was out one evening. Pretending to be on a late conference call for work, I stayed home and scoured the phone records, piecing together a story that felt both foreign and painfully real. Every text, every call to that unknown number, every late night out she'd chalked up to girls' night or work drinks, they all fit together, each a thread she'd woven into this web of betrayal. I looked up the hotel she'd gone to, noted the reservation times, and even found receipts tucked in our shared email, all confirming what I already knew. But none of it hurt as much as what came next. Digging a little deeper, I stumbled upon a reservation she'd made for an upcoming business trip, one that coincided suspiciously well with her lover's city. It wasn't just a fling, this was premeditated, planned, as if she had a life that didn't involve me at all. She was living a double life, hiding behind the comfort of our marriage like a mask. When I saw that reservation, the anger in me gave way to something sharper, colder. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Revenge started brewing in my mind, not the kind where you scream and demand answers, but a quiet, calculated form. The kind where she wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. I'd spent years building our life together. We owned a home, shared investments, accounts, memories. Everything we'd done, every accomplishment, had been under the illusion of loyalty and love. Now, as I reviewed those shared assets, I started seeing them as weapons I could wield. It became clear that the only way to deal with this was to dismantle her world the same way she'd been dismantling mine, bit by bit, choice by choice, until it all came crashing down. One night, I decided to test her. She was getting ready to go out again, her face buried in the mirror as she layered on makeup and dabbed on perfume. I watched her through the reflection, half wondering if she'd sensed the rage just beneath my calm expression. "So," I said, keeping my tone light, "where are you headed tonight?" She glanced at me, barely pausing as she touched up her eyeliner. "Out with the girls," she replied, smooth as silk, as if she'd rehearsed it 100 times. "We're going to that new wine bar downtown. You know, the one with the rooftop garden." "Right," I said, feigning interest. "Sounds nice. Give my best to the girls." Her only response was a quick nod before she went back to her reflection, adjusting a stray hair. If she noticed the edge in my voice, she didn't show it. But it didn't matter. I already knew she wasn't meeting any friends. I'd watched her go through this exact routine too many times to believe otherwise. As she left that night, I followed her again, but this time, I didn't stop at just tracking her location on my phone. Instead, I drove over to the hotel, parked a few blocks away, and watched the entrance from a distance. I saw her walk through the lobby doors, heels clicking on the tile, her face a mask of excitement I hadn't seen in years. It was a look she once saved just for me. But tonight, it was for someone else. I forced myself to stay put, my fists clenched around the steering wheel. She was barely inside before I saw a man join her, an average-looking guy in a suit, nothing remarkable about him. It didn't make sense. Why him? What did he have that I didn't? But as I watched her lean in, laughing at something he said, I realized it wasn't about him. It was about her. She was chasing something, some thrill or feeling I'd never see or understand. The fact that she could do it so openly, without a hint of shame, nearly broke me. I headed home, still not ready to confront her. If I had, I would have stormed the hotel, thrown her betrayal in her face, demanded answers. But I had to stick to the plan. I would unravel everything she had, take back control, and leave her with nothing but the memories of the life she'd thrown away. The following week, I set things in motion. First, I made an appointment with a lawyer, someone discreet and highly recommended. I wanted to make sure that when I pulled the trigger on this, it would be as clean as possible, without a single loose end. Every asset, every account was meticulously examined. I made arrangements to secure my finances, transferring shared investments into accounts she couldn't touch, notifying the bank to flag suspicious activity. The attorney advised me to gather every bit of proof I had, to build a case so airtight that there would be no room for negotiations, no way for her to fight me when it was all laid out in court. I also set up a work trip of my own, booking a few nights at a hotel far from home. I wanted her to think I'd be out of town, to buy myself time to prepare the final pieces of my plan without her suspecting a thing. As I packed a small bag, she asked where I was headed, and I told her it was a last-minute conference, one I couldn't skip. Her response was oddly casual, a mere, "Oh, okay. I hope it goes well." If there was any guilt, any remorse, she hid it well. In fact, she almost seemed relieved to have the house to herself. The night before my departure, I did something I never thought I'd do, I left her a little surprise. I'd removed every single key she had access to, changed the alarm codes, and ensured her credit cards were declined the second she tried to use them. I wanted to see her reaction, to watch her scramble when she realized the comfortable life she'd built on deception was crumbling around her. As I walked out the door, I left a manila envelope on the kitchen counter, right where she'd see it. Inside were copies of every hotel reservation, phone records, photos, everything that proved just how deep her betrayal went. With everything in place, I headed to the hotel and waited. It was late in the evening when my phone buzzed with a frantic message from her, "The locks won't work. I can't get into the house. What's going on?" I took my time replying, letting her stew in confusion. "I'm done," I finally texted back. "Go stay with him." The phone rang almost immediately, but I ignored it, watching the messages pop up on my screen, each one more desperate than the last. She tried everything, pleading, bargaining, even claiming it had all been a mistake and begging me to come home. She didn't know that home had been dismantled piece by piece, and she was the one who'd set it all in motion. The flood of messages continued through the night. At first, they were frantic, confused, demanding an explanation. Then came the calls, each one flashing on my screen, but I ignored them, letting her feel every ounce of panic and uncertainty that she'd left me with over these last few months. She didn't know I was watching her from a distance, waiting in my own silence, while her reality unraveled bit by bit. By morning, her tone had shifted. Now, the messages were softer, remorseful. She was begging me to let her explain, claiming that none of it had meant anything, that she still loved me and had just been lost for a while. The desperation in her words would have been enough to shake me before, but now, they just sounded hollow. When I finally picked up her call, the pleading in her voice was almost unbearable. "Please, just come home. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you. Please, let me explain." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her feel the weight of it. "Explain what?" I asked coldly. "How you lied. Or how you spent our entire marriage pretending." "No, no. It wasn't like that," she protested, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, but I was just confused. It was a stupid mistake. I don't want to lose you over this." "A mistake?" I let out a harsh laugh. "A mistake is when you forget an anniversary, not when you sneak around behind my back for months. Do you know how many nights I sat there, watching you walk out that door, thinking I was the one losing my mind?" Her sobs on the other end of the line were quiet but unmistakable. It was the first time I'd ever heard her break like that, but it didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, it reminded me of the countless nights I'd spent wrestling with my own hurt, forced to smile and pretend that everything was okay. "What do you want me to say?" she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking you, please. I love you. I can't do this without you." The words hung in the air, twisting into a version of themselves that felt almost cruel in their desperation. I could feel the pull, the old, familiar urge to take her hand, to give in and forgive. But the memory of her with him, the hotel rendezvous, the careful lies, it all flooded back, reminding me why I couldn't give in. "You made your choice," I said finally, my tone flat. "You thought I wouldn't find out, that you could keep me in the dark forever. Well, now you get to live with the consequences. We're done. The lawyer has everything, every text, every receipt, every lie. You can have him, and you can keep your excuses." She broke down completely at that, pleading and sobbing, her voice breaking as she begged for another chance. "Please, I'll do anything. I don't care about the money, the house, just please, don't leave me." I listened in silence, feeling an odd sense of detachment. Her tears, her panic, it was all so distant, like watching a scene unfold in a movie. When she finally fell silent, I hung up without another word. The next few days were a strange blur. I went through the motions, returning to work, going about my day, but everything felt surreal. Friends and family had started to notice something was off, but I deflected their questions, not ready to share the full story. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it had dulled, replaced by a hollow ache that lingered in my chest. Then, on the third day, she showed up at my office. I saw her standing there through the glass, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. She was dressed simply, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. She looked nothing like the woman who'd walked out on me night after night, all dressed up with secrets to keep. Reluctantly, I opened the door, motioning for her to come in. She sat down across from me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I just needed to see you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I can't just walk away from us. Please, just hear me out." I leaned back, crossing my arms. You've got 5 minutes. She took a shaky breath, her eyes never leaving the floor. I know you won't believe this, but I've been so unhappy. Not because of you, but, with myself. I felt like I was fading, like I was trapped in this routine, losing who I was. And when he came along, he made me feel seen. I don't expect you to understand, but it wasn't about love. It was about escaping myself. Her words washed over me, stirring up old memories of nights spent trying to rekindle the spark, to make her feel loved, appreciated, wanted. But it seemed that no amount of effort on my part had been enough. In the end, she'd turned to someone else to fill the emptiness I'd tried so hard to heal. So, what? I replied, my voice cold. You're saying I was never enough? No, she said, shaking her head, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. It's not like that. You're more than enough. You always were. This was my failure, my weakness, and I hate myself for it. I don't want to lose you over this. I don't want to throw away everything we've built. I wanted to laugh, to scream at her for being so selfish, for thinking that she could waltz back into my life after shattering it. But instead, I just stared at her, letting her words linger in the silence. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. You already threw it all away. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling between us like a stone. She looked down, her shoulders slumping as the reality of it hit her. There was no going back, no words that could undo what she'd done. After a long pause, she looked up at me, her face filled with resignation. If this is really it, if there's no way to fix this, then at least tell me how I can make it right. I'll sign anything, do anything. Just tell me what you want. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. She was ready to give it all up, everything she'd clung to, the comfort and security that had come at my expense. It was my chance to take back control, to make sure she felt the sting of betrayal just as I had. Fine, I said, my voice steady. You want to make it right? Then leave everything. The house, the savings, everything we built together. Walk away, and I'll consider letting this end quietly. She looked stunned, her eyes widening as the full impact of my words sank in. But slowly, she nodded, her face a mask of acceptance. If that's what you need, then I'll do it. I didn't soften, didn't offer her a single word of comfort. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. As she rose to leave, she hesitated, looking back at me one last time. I'll always regret this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I hope someday you can forgive me. I didn't answer. I watched her go, knowing that, finally, I was free. Free of the lies, the deceit, and the weight of a marriage that had been crumbling for far longer than I'd realized. And as she disappeared from view, I felt something lift, a sense of peace settling over me that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned, but it was the one I needed. And for the first time, I felt like I could finally move forward, leaving the broken pieces behind. The dust settled slowly, like the drifting particles that fill a room after something breaks. I thought I'd feel better, more at ease. Instead, I felt hollow, a quiet numbness spreading in the silence of our now empty house. The anger, the desire for revenge, the sense of triumph, they all felt meaningless. She was gone, the house was mine, and all I had left was the life we'd built, now stripped of the one person who'd once made it feel complete. Days turned to weeks, and I tried to distract myself. I poured everything into my work, keeping late hours, going out with friends who had been around long enough to know something had shifted. They offered the usual condolences, encouragement to move on, and invitations to hit the town and get back out there. I smiled, laughed, played the part, but the feeling of emptiness was always there, lurking in the background. It was late one night, a few months after she'd signed away everything, that I came across a box I'd missed in my cleanup. I pulled it down from a high shelf in the garage, thinking it was just more junk we'd accumulated over the years. But inside were the letters, dozens of them, bound together with string, all in her handwriting. They were addressed to me, notes she'd never given me, tucked away like secrets too painful to share. The first one was dated 2 years into our marriage, the words shaky and uncertain. I love you, but sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm scared to tell you because I know how much this life means to you. I just want to feel alive. Each letter painted a portrait of a woman who was unraveling, struggling to find herself in the life we'd built. She'd written about feeling lost, how she felt like she was living in someone else's dream, unable to keep up with the expectations I'd unknowingly placed on her. She never blamed me directly, but the words were there, hiding in the margins, the regret, the fear, the yearning for something she couldn't define. As I read through the letters, the weight of it hit me like a tidal wave. I'd always seen her as the one who betrayed me, the one who shattered the life we'd built. But for the first time, I saw the cracks I'd missed, the pain she'd carried alone, the desperation that had driven her to make choices I'd never understood. By the time I reached the last letter, my hands were trembling. In it, she wrote about the day she met him, the man who had become her escape. He made me feel seen, like I was someone worth noticing again. It was wrong, and I know that now. But I can't change what happened. I just hope one day you'll understand that it was never about not loving you. It was about not knowing how to love myself. I sat there for hours, staring at those words, feeling everything I'd fought so hard to ignore finally breaking through. The anger, the resentment, the pride, they all melted away, leaving only the aching truth that, somewhere along the line, we'd both lost sight of each other. I hadn't seen her slipping away, hadn't noticed the slow erosion of the woman I thought I knew. And in her silence, she drifted further, until she was beyond my reach. That night, I slept restlessly, haunted by memories, by the image of her face as she'd walked out for the last time, the weight of her regret hanging between us. I dreamed of the life we'd once dreamed of together, and woke up feeling a sadness I hadn't felt since the day she'd left. It was an emptiness that no amount of revenge could fill, a hollow ache that reminded me of all we'd lost. I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd read the letters, face the truth, and move on. But 2 days later, I received a call that shattered whatever fragile peace I'd managed to find. "Mr. Hayes?" a voice asked, sounding weary and uncertain. "Yes," I replied, my heart sinking with a sense of dread. "This is Dr. Manning, from St. Joseph's Hospital. I'm so sorry to reach out like this, but I'm calling about your ex-wife, Evelyn. She was admitted last night, and we tried everything, but she didn't make it." The words didn't register at first. It was like hearing them in a language I didn't understand. Evelyn, my Evelyn, was gone. She was gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring her back. The doctor continued, saying something about a car accident, that she'd been alone, that they'd found my number listed as her emergency contact. I barely heard him, my mind reeling, grasping at the impossible reality. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat there in silence, feeling the weight of it settle over me like a suffocating fog. Days passed in a blur. The funeral came and went, a small gathering, mostly her family, a few close friends. I stayed at the back, not wanting to intrude, feeling like I no longer belonged to the world that had once been ours. The life we'd shared, the dreams we'd built, they were all buried with her, leaving only memories and the ache of things left unsaid. One night, a few weeks later, I found myself back in the empty house, her letters spread out on the table before me. I read through them again, each one a reminder of the woman I'd loved and lost, of the life we'd once dreamed of, and of the pain we'd both carried in silence. I realized then that all the anger, all the revenge, had been a mask for the grief I hadn't wanted to feel. She'd been lost, yes, but so had I. And now, there was no way to find each other again. In the quiet of that empty house, I finally allowed myself to cry, to mourn not just the woman she had been, but the man I had once been as well. We'd both been broken, in ways neither of us had understood. And in our desperation, we'd pushed each other away, until all that was left were the empty spaces we couldn't fill. As the dawn broke, I made a decision. I gathered up the letters, each one a fragment of our lost story, and carried them outside. One by one, I let them drift into the morning breeze, watching as they scattered, disappearing into the light. It was the only goodbye I had left, a farewell to the life we dreamed of, the woman I'd loved, and the man I'd tried so hard to be. And as the last letter faded from sight, I stood alone, feeling the weight of my own choices, the depth of my own sorrow. In that moment, I understood that some wounds never fully heal, that some stories end not with closure, but with the quiet ache of things left undone.